Okay, here it's time for another type of subnetting question. Maybe like something you would get on the exam, except that your answers will be multiple choice and they'll be right there in front of you. But being able to know which is the correct answer is the important thing. That's why we're doing the subnetting, and that's why we're starting from this point. So the question states, what is the last usable IP address on the network 192.168.108.72/29? Now, that question stated this is the network. This means the network ID, which is a .72. What's going up? We're going to use the /29. So I encourage you to learn the chart, write it down multiple times until you can do it right off memory, no mistakes, and so on. So I'm just going to drop it in here real quick. And a /29 obviously goes up by 8. So let's get rid of that. And we already know it goes up by 8. So we're going to add 8 to the next, that's 72. And obviously, now that we added the 8 to it, we're going to end up with an 80. Now, those are both network IDs. So we know that the one we're working with happens to be a .72. We know the one that's above it that we're not going to be working with is a .80. And now let's go figure out what we're working with, okay? Now, I want you to figure out all four things because this makes it easier. It'll actually help you with some of your other questions on the quiz depending on how they word them. So let's start out with network ID and let's do the .72 just like it said. The first usable is going to be one higher than the network ID, which is going to be a .73. I always tell people go with a broadcast next. It makes it easier because some people get it confused between last usable and broadcast and sometimes get the wrong answer. Well, we know the broadcast has to be one less than the next network ID, which is 79. So this makes the last usable a little bit easier because the last usable has to be one less than the broadcast, which is going to be a 78. What are they looking for? They're looking for the last usable IP address on that network, and here is your answer. On to the next question. Okay, our second question. What is the valid or usable host or IP range? Is the IP address 192.168.39.217/26 a part of? Okay. Now we're only looking for the usable range. Remember, we're going to lose 2. We can't use the network ID to assign it to anything, and we can't assign the broadcast, but we're still going to figure these out. I'd like you to make sure that you get the network ID, first usable, last usable, and broadcast, because first usable to last usable is your network range or your IP range. So we already know we're working in the 4th octet. Remember, /25 through /32 is the 4th octet. So really what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to kind of start without having that 4th octet there. I'm just going to leave that one blank at this point. Now, first of all, I've warned you, I've told you have to know this chart. You have to understand it. So let's go ahead. I'm going to drop the chart in there real quick just in case you don't have it. And a /26 goes up by 64. So let's go ahead and eliminate that. So we know we're going up by 64. So we've got that established. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start out with .0, obviously. And I think I should have left that. There we go. .0. And let's add 64. So our next one is going to be 64. Well, 217 doesn't fall there, so let's add another 64. And we know that 64 plus 64 is 128. 217 doesn't fall in there, so let's add another 64. And of course, 64 plus 128 happens to be 192. The 217 doesn't fall in there again. Whoops, 192. So let's add another 64, and here comes our good old 256 problem again. We know we can't use 256, and the network ID has to be even, so it's got to roll over just like an odometer. So at this point, instead of being a .39, we are now going to roll that over to a .40 and go with .0. So the 217 does fall between these two. So I want you to go put .39, .192, and then outside that good old goalpost, let's put .40, .0. So what we're looking for is the usable range, okay? So we already know the network ID. This one's going to be fairly simple, cut and dry. It's not going to be that hard to figure out. It's 192. And obviously the first usable always has to be one higher than the network ID. So we go with the .39, .193. That is your first usable. Remember again, let's go with the broadcast before we figure out the last usable. Well, one less than this 40.0, obviously it's 255 because that's where it rolls. So go 255, and we know the network, the last usable has to be one less than the broadcast, which would make it 254. Now, you want to know your range. Fairly simple. We're going to go first usable through last usable. First usable is going to be 193, and we need to go through to 192.168.39.254. That is your usable range. And now we're on to the third part. Okay, the final question in this series is, what is the last valid or usable host/IP address on the network 172.22.87.64/28? Okay, this is the network ID. They are telling you that up front. So we're working on the .64, but we're going to use the /28. This is why you need to understand this chart and make your life a lot easier, and you'll get the answers a lot quicker. So I'm just going to drop the chart in here real quick. /28 goes up by 16, and we can get rid of the chart. We don't need it anymore. So we're already working with network IDs, and we already know our network ID happens to be 172.87 or .22.87.64. I'll get better at this as I keep practicing, promise. So we're going to go up by 16. Well, obviously, the next one going up by 16, and there I go doing this again. Let's just go ahead and type it out. 172.22.87.80 is where we need to be. So now we already know, hey, here is our network ID that we're working with. We're working with a .64. We can't use a .80, and really at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and do network ID, first usable, and so on, but really all you're looking at is the last usable. If you look at the last usable, you can go with a broadcast right away and make your life a lot easier. It'll get you to the answer a lot quicker. But I'm trying to get you to understand all the different things you need to know, okay? So in this situation, we already know that our network ID is obviously the .64. And the first usable's got to be higher than that, one higher, which is .65. And I always tell people, do the broadcast next. Do the broadcast, one less than 80 is 79. And obviously the last usable in this particular situation has got to be one less than the broadcast, which is 78. So the answer for question 3 is 172.22.87.78. We'll come up with some more within the next day or two. Thank you.